Hello, this is Fairly Secret Music. I'm David. As I promised before, Vinylizer inspired me to do a Gary Moore video. If you don't know Gary Moore, he was a Irish rock guitarist, and he passed away in 2011. He did blues, the hard rock, and kind of metal in the 80s. I would never say he was really a progressive rock guy, although I'm looking at the Wikipedia thing and they have that in there. But mainly known as for hard rock and blues rock. He sang on all of his albums. He would have a guest singer every once in a while. I'll get to that. But he was part of the original Skid Row way back in the 70s. Thin Lizzy, Coliseum 2. He played with Phil Lynott and Greg Lake and BBM and G-Force and B.B. King. So I'm going to just go through the albums that I have. I don't have Grinding Stone because I haven't found it for under like $30. I believe there's a new version of it that I can get for a reasonable price, but it just hasn't been on my radar. His first solo album was Back on the Streets, and he kind of mixed. I guess that would probably be where the prog kind of stuff goes, because there's an instrumental on here that's more fusion than anything, and Phil played bass on it. Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy. Brian Downey, also from Thin Lizzy, played drums. Simon Phillips plays drums. This is probably what I think is maybe his best album. It's a hard choice between this and Run for Cover. Run for Cover has so much good stuff on it. The track listing, you have the title track, and you have Don't Believe a Word, which was originally a Thin Lizzy song, but the Thin Lizzy's version is or something close to that, but his version comes in and it's boom 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 doom 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 doom, really mellow, and he's all like, "Don't believe me if I tell you, not a word of this is true," and it's just fantastic. I love that version better because that was the version that my brother had taped for me, because when he made me a mixtape of this, or just taped the whole album, actually, I hadn't heard the Thin Lizzy version before I heard this version, so I always thought this was the original, and I really, really like this version. He does a song called Fanatical Fascists, and I believe there's a line where he says, "Fanatical fascists with Italian sunglasses," and I love weird rhyming. He and Phil from Thin Lizzy on the album that I'm going to talk about rhymes like crazy. He does Parisian Walkways on this. It's the last song. I believe Phil sings on that version. There's a couple different versions of this album out there, especially on vinyl. One way you'll get one with Phil doing the vocals, and I believe another one where Gary is doing the vocals. I know they did that on Spanish Guitar, which is the bonus track on here. They have 3 different versions. They have an instrumental track, a Phil, and a Gary Moore vocal. But I believe Phil sang the leads. I might be wrong on that for this album. There was also an instrumental called "What Would You Rather Be or a Wasp?" and another one called Flight of the Snow Moose. And that one, Flight of the Snow Moose, is where he gets very fusiony. Think of like the gong stuff that Alan Holdsworth was playing a little bit, you know, not exactly, or Jean-Luc Ponty, Nostalgic Lady, or even some of the Bruford stuff. This album is well worth the price that you would pay for it. Even if you pay like $30 for it, you will love it. If you are a guitar fan, you will love it. After this, he got back with Thin Lizzy again. He had been with them after they had lost their first guitarist, I believe, and then he once Brian Robertson left Thin Lizzy, he stepped in. They did this album. There is a version of this album that has like the demos, and I believe it was let me see what this guy's name was. Mark Nassif. He played drums on the demos. I think there was something going on with Brian Downey at the time. This is probably my favorite Thin Lizzy. No, not even probably. This is my favorite Thin Lizzy album. This is the album that I regret not having kids for, because I would love to have a son or a daughter and sit them down and say, we are going to listen to one of the greatest albums of the time in the whole world. They would probably not like it. Who knows, though? And I would especially make sure they listen to the title track. This starts with Do Anything You Want. Right out of the gate, you get the guitar harmonies with him and Scott Gorham. Toughest Street in Town has some of the greatest rhyming lines, like in the back with a pack with a rat ready for attack, or something crazy like that. You'll know what I'm talking about. The only downfall on this album is I'm kind of about S&M, but it is kind of a cool song. Waiting for an Alibi has got one of the coolest bass lines ever. And Got to Give It Up is so heart-wrenching because it's lyrics about giving up alcohol and drugs, and there's a part where he says, where it kicks in and he's like, tell my mother and tell my father. And that just kind of brings a tear to my eye every time, knowing how he died. Phil, that is. But the title track, the guitar part, the dum ba dum da do 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 dum ba do dum da do 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 dum. If you don't fall in love with this album just for that title track alone, then I don't know. I can't talk to you. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so after he left Thin Lizzy again, I believe it was On the Road, he started a band called G-Force. And G-Force had Mark Newsoff. Sorry, I have to check out these guys' names. Tony Newton, who played bass. And it's actually credited wrong in here. It says Tony Newton was vocals, but Willie D sings on this. And Willie D had a couple solo albums. His name is Willie Daffrin, I think it is. And he also sang on the third and final Captain Beyond album, and that was the band that I believe the original Deep Purple singer was part of, and the original Iron Butterfly drummer. I may be wrong about those things, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. This album has some great stuff because Willie D and Gary both do trade-off vocals, kind of like Stanley and Simmons used to do. She's Got You is such a great groove. It's just, I love it. I love it. It's so great. That's probably the high point of this album. The low point of this album is the fact that Gary sounds like he's using some weird like effects unit to run his guitars, and the guitar tone on this album is so bad. It's so hard to overlook, but luckily I fell in love with this album when I didn't know any better. So now I just listen to it and I go, wow, that's kind of a crappy guitar tone. Were I to listen to it now for the first time, I might just go, oh, yikes. But listen. So if you're going to check this out, listen to She's Got You. I believe, let me see. Yeah, that was the key. This also has a instrumental thing called White Knuckles. If you don't know anything about Gary Moore, he was a shredder. He was a shredder when he wanted to be, and he was amazing. And Gary went throughout his entire career kind of looking for another singer, I believe, and always was the reluctant singer of the band. I love his voice. I don't know if anybody else out there feels the same, but yeah, he was amazing. This is the only album that I don't have the remastered version of. It's Dirty Fingers. This one, wow. I was just looking at, there we go. Dirty Fingers is one of my least favorite for some reason, and it has a good lineup. It has Tommy Aldrich on drums and Jimmy Bain on bass, Don Airey on organ and keyboards. I didn't realize that there was a guy named Charlie Hun that played or did vocals. Looks like Gary only sings on one. I don't listen to this album enough to really know it. I remember Hiroshima and Nuclear Attack were two of the standout tracks, and I know he recorded those live, I believe, on a few things. This is a weird, shitty copy. That it was the only version that I've ever seen. It was on Jet Records, and it's just kind of generic. This is the one that I kind of overlook out of his entire rock section of his career. Now, Corridors of Power has Ian Pace, Neil Murray, and Tommy Ayers on keyboards. This is a fantastic album. Gary sings on this, the whole thing. The standout track of this album is I Can't Wait Till Tomorrow. And just like how it builds and builds, and when it gets into like the really heavy part, just, it's weird. I get very emotional when I listen to that track for some reason. I listened to a lot of these around 86 when it was like a summer where I didn't see any friends or didn't have any friends or something like that. And that is honestly an era that is probably the best in my life. I think I was in 8th grade or something like that, between 7th and 8th grade. It has Don't Take Me for a Loser, which is a great opening track. Sometimes he did a few too many ballads for my taste. I felt that some of his ballads were kind of just okay, like Always Gonna Love You. He does, what are these guys called? Free. He does Wishing Well, which is a pretty decent cover. I'm not a big fan of covers, but I believe the song "End of the World." Let me see if no, I think "End of the World." Let me see. Yeah, I think he sings on this whole album. It has some of the worst print ever. You cannot read this stuff. Yep, I was right. So, End of the World has Jack Bruce doing guest vocals. That song is amazing, too. Between End of the World and I Can't Wait Till Tomorrow, those are the two big standout tracks to me on this album. And he followed it up with Victims of the Future. I'm going to just put that up for right now because I need to see exactly who was playing what on this. Let me see if I can just look at... Now I'll put this back up. That is the one that that Vinylizer was showing on his video. Turns out he got the Victims of the Future sleeve, but it had Corridors of Power album in there, or at least that's what I gathered from his comments. And the guy who had sent it to him wanted him to send it back. There was a different version with the cover. I don't know if you'll be able to see this very well. That was the original cover, I believe, or the British cover. Nope, that was the original North American cover. So this was the British cover, or the English cover, or whatever. On this album, he's got Neil Murray on bass. I don't know if you know who Neil Murray is. He played with Whitesnake for a long time until that whole 84 fiasco. Neil Murray actually, I believe, played with... I want to say Neil Murray played with Ozzy too. But let me see. No, he played with Black Sabbath, I guess, for a while. And Bob Daisley is on bass, and Bob Daisley's the guy that I was thinking played with Ozzy. Ian Pace is on drums. Mo Foster is on bass. Gary is on guitar and vocals. And this album is... I remember this one because of songs that he recorded later. It has Empty Rooms, which was a great song. I believe that was a hit in Europe. Murder in the Skies was great. And Victims of the Future. This is the version with a bunch of, 3 bonus tracks. This one I'm not as familiar with because I went a long time without having these albums. So... the cassettes or the vinyl dubs that I did onto CD were the only thing that I was listening to, and I really don't listen to burned CDs that much anymore. I feel I need the actual disc in my hand. This is probably tied with the best album besides Back on the Streets. This has some of the best songs that Gary ever did. It has Phil singing on Military Man, which was a song that I believe Phil wrote also with him. You have Glenn Hughes singing on 2 or 3 tracks. I know he did Reach for the Sky and Nothing to Lose. And honestly, those songs are great, but Gary sings just as well as Glenn and Phil on these songs. Military Man is probably my favorite. Military Man and Out in the Fields. Out in the Fields also has Phil singing on it. It's kind of like a back and forth with them. My favorite line in that song is "No flag or uniform ever stopped a bullet from a gun. And they had some really good lyrics back then. These weren't kind of stupid lyrics that you had with a lot of kind of hair metal or hard rock things. And I love my hair metal, but sometimes their lyrics were stupid. Not my fault. The album that first, I think, one of the first ones I ever heard from him was Wild Frontier. And in Minnesota, we had a classic rock station that in the 80s, what year was this done? Let me find out. Wild Frontier was released in 87. Yeah, in like 86, 87, 88. They still played new hard rock and new stuff. Now they're just classic rock stations. They don't play anything new. They don't play anything interesting anymore. I mean, it's stuff you've all heard before. But they played Over the Hills and Far Away like in a heavy rotation for some reason here. And that was a great song. It's catchy as hell, you know. It has the drums at the beginning, just catchy. Is awesome that they were playing that. They played that, and they also played, if you don't know, John Butcher Wishes album. They played a song called Holy War. That album is fantastic. He's another guitarist that I really like, but that album is the pinnacle of John Butcher's stuff that he was putting out. A lot of John Butcher's stuff ended up only being available on vinyl. I've seen like 3 or 4 albums that I'm like, shit, if they put those on CD, I would buy them in a heartbeat, but nobody's done it. Wild Frontier on here. This is a song that always kind of tugs at my heartstrings when it says, I remember a friend of mine so sad now that he's gone. And I had a friend who actually played on he was the guitarist for our the Waves of Mercury project that I do, and he died in 2008, and so I kind of think of him when I think of that song or when I hear that song. Let's see what other tracks were. Thunder Rising is awesome. One thing that's bad about this album is you have Neil Carter and Bob Daisley on bass. Downside of this album, drum machine. And it sounds like a really good drum machine, but I wonder what it would sound like if they had actually used a real drummer. Thunder Rising is amazing. There's a lot of double bass in it, which is pretty rare for a Gary Moore album, but just the power of that song is just fantastic. And then the closing track, Johnny Boy, which he wrote for Phil. That is a song that really gets me emotional because I have a brother named John, and I've told him, I'm playing this or singing this at your funeral, dude. He's 20 years older than me, and but let's face it, he's probably in better shape than I am, and he'll probably have to be singing it at my funeral. All right. Then the last real rockin' thing that he did was an album called After the War. And this, he uses kind of little themes like on The Loner from this album, which was an instrumental song. He does another instrumental that kind of is reminiscent of that. And this was kind of a letdown album after what I thought was a great album in Wild Frontier. But the one thing that everybody remembers this album from is the song Lead Clones, and this song has Ozzy Osbourne singing on it, and I believe Gary is singing on it too. It was in response for Kingdom Come doing that first album where everybody was like, wow, you guys are just Led Zeppelin clones. And I think it's funny because they did sound a little bit like Led Zeppelin, but not even near as much as Bonham's first album. That thing sounded like Led Zeppelin. And yeah, I get it, it's Bonham's son, but if we're going to criticize Kingdom Come for doing it, why don't we criticize Bonham for doing it? And now everybody listens to Greta Van Fleet, and nobody cares. And I love the fact that Greta Van Fleet have a sound similar to Led Zeppelin, because younger kids these days might go, holy shit, Greta Van Fleet's awesome. And people say, oh, they sound exactly like Led Zeppelin. And they have a whole discography of Led Zeppelin to listen to. And there's no reason why they won't like that if they like Greta Van Fleet. Unless they're just into them because, I don't know, aesthetically pleasing or whatever, you know. I don't know. I do not let my penis make my musical choices for me. Never have. I don't care how hot the singer of In This Moment is. I still hate that band. Gary Moore After Hours. This is when he decided to finally go the blues route, and Cold Day in Hell was a fantastic song. I've watched a lot of blues videos with Gary, and he finally found his niche. This was after Stevie Ray Vaughan had passed away, and honestly, I don't think there was a better fit for Gary than blues. I don't like all of it. I'm not a big blues fan. These are the only two that I have. This is a later one that I can't even tell you any songs on here or what they sound like because I've only listened to it once. But Cold Day in Hell was great, and Story of the Blues. He did a lot of stuff with B.B. King around this time too. If you are interested in guitar and like blues stuff, you can't go wrong with Gary's stuff. There's this one, and there's one before it, I believe, called After... Oh, gosh. Let me see what this list says. After Hours was one of the first ones. Oh, no, this is After Hours. What am I talking about? There's Still Got the Blues, and then After Hours. Sorry about that. So the last album I'm going to talk about, and hopefully this is a shorter video than most of mine. This is I didn't even know I bought the digitally remastered version of this. I wonder what happened to my regular version. This is basically Gary Moore, Ginger Baker, Jack Bruce. It's basically Cream with Gary taking over as with Eric Clapton's part. I read an interview where he said the tour for this was awful because all those two did is fight, and it was atrocious. But there's some really great songs on here, like Waiting in the Wings. Let's see. Why Does Love Have to Go Wrong? There's a part where Jack is singing and he does this vocal line and he holds this note and the note gets taken over by the guitar. It is fantastic. I love this album. This is probably the third best thing in my opinion. You got Back in the Streets and Run for Cover and, well, no, Back on the Streets, Run for Cover, Wild Frontier, and this would probably be the top 4 of my Gary collection. And that is it. Hopefully you like Gary Moore or were interested in Gary Moore and all that fun stuff. And I will see you later.